I think agents are necessary in this business. So, they're sort of like the gatekeepers of all of the information that's sort of floating around town. And so I always tell people that an agent is only going to be as good for you as much stuff you give them to do for you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think we could do a whole podcast just on this topic alone.
Because the agents, they don't get to keep that 10%. That 10% goes to the agency. They get bonuses at the end of the year that are based off of their commission they make throughout the year. A manager, if they're an independent manager and they're just their own manager and they have clients, that 10% does go to them.
Go to IMDb, look at your favorite movies, look at who produced them, figure out if they're actually like a PGA producer. Like, did they actually produce the movie? And give them a call.
Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen, back with another one of our mini-series episodes for Hollywood Explained with Laura Walker-Lee of AG Capital and Madre Ventures and Andy Horowitz from Big Swell. Laura, I'm going to hand it off to you. What are we going to talk about this week?
Well, what we're going to talk about this week is representatives. I think with the strike tentatively being over, the writers, the 11,000 union members, still need to vote on the actual agreement that's been tentatively agreed to between the AMPTP and the WGA. There's a lot of agents and managers and lawyers who are about to get back to work, and we realized that people outside the industry may not actually realize what those people do. So we thought it was a good topic to cover.
And we will definitely cover the outcome of the strike and the deal. None of us have read the deal yet, so we don't know exactly what the writers got. But we'll do that in a follow-up episode where we get to take you through exactly what all of that stuff means and if we feel like the 146 days was worth it. I hope it was.
Hopefully it was.
Well, Laura, I'm going to start with you. Pre AG Capital, can you talk about what you did at CAA and what that actually means?
Yeah, sure. I've had a lot of jobs in the industry. I've been a production assistant, assistant director, studio executive, in that order. And then I went to Creative Artists Agency, which is one of the big three agencies, and I worked in what was then called the Film Finance Group. Now it's called something much more impressive, like Global Media something. But at the time it was
Media Finance, I think it is now.
Media Finance. Okay, it's very well. I mean, all of it's blending, so it makes sense for them to change the name. But back in 2008 till 2015, when I worked there, I was specifically looking for movies to package. We'll go over that term, and also to sell to studios. But my general title was just agent. And there are different types of agents who work within the agency. So I guess we can start there. There are motion picture agents that cover just creatives who are creating films. There are TV agents who cover the TV landscape, like networks and streamers and things like that. On behalf of their clients. I was a film finance agent and a packaging agent, so I would work in conjunction with those two departments who represented writers, directors, and actors. And I would put elements together with my colleagues to make a fully packaged movie. This was usually outside the studio system. Within the studio system, you have agents in motion picture and television who are like covering agents. There are senior agents who just manage their client list, and then more junior agents who, as they are building their lists, they are also covering a major studio, and they're cultivating relationships with networks and studios to find out what kind of projects are they looking for, what are they financing, and all of these types of agents come together in staff meetings, like these super mega staff meetings, and we just exchange information and someone may have read a great screenplay and they talk about that. Someone may have signed a new actress out of a Broadway play and they talk about that. Someone may have had dinner with an executive from Fox, and there's a big initiative at Fox, and so they talk about that. And everyone's just writing down things. They're keeping their clients in mind. They're figuring things out. That happens, these staff meetings happen 2, 3 times a week. And then they leave the staff meeting and they just start making phone calls to each other, to their clients, to executives, things like that. And then Andy gets a fair amount of those phone calls as a producer. So what have I left out in the agency world, Andy?
I mean, by the way, just going on the staff meeting thing, you always know when your project get brought up in a staff meeting because you get calls from all different corners of the agencies. And a lot of them are just sort of checking in. A lot of them want to know why you haven't already shared it with them and why you shared it with their colleague instead of them. And maybe they have better, so you sort of you realize oh, something got brought up in the directors meeting today. And, everyone's calling about this project that we have, pitching directors. Um, I think you cover a lot of it. I think that there's, as you said, there's some minutia there. I think especially with covering agents, a lot of bigger production companies have deals at studios, and so if you're represented, at an agency, you'll be sort of paired with your covering agent for whoever covers Warner Brothers or Sony. If you have your deal at Warner Brothers, agents could represent everyone in the business. I've actually even heard of them representing studio heads sometimes when they're negotiating their contracts at studios. Sometimes an agent will get involved to sort of help those deals get done. But agents will represent producers, directors, writers, actors. They also represent, there's a whole nother side of the agency, which they call the below the line agents, which represent production designers, costume designers, makeup artists, anyone that I ever need to do a deal with. Usually you're dealing with an agent of some kind that's getting in the middle of it, for better or worse. Normally from my side, I look at that as usually that's a worse thing because they usually are harder to make a deal with when an agent gets involved. But I think agents are necessary in this business. So, they're sort of the gatekeepers of all of the information that's sort of floating around town. I, as a producer, I'm represented by an agency as well. And so, as a producer, we sort of look at agents as they're nice to have. We don't really rely on them. We don't really need them, but it's always nice to sort of have that backup in your corner when it's time to make your producing deal. They're really helpful in that regard for producers, because when you're making your producing deal at a studio, they also represent, 100 other producers that also made deals at that studio. So when you're represented by an agency and you're making your deal at a studio, the studio knows that they have to at least give you, similarly what they gave UTAs or WMEs or CAs, other clients of producers for a movie of that size, for that level of producer. So it holds people accountable sometimes, I think, in the deal making process, because that you've got sort of this agency behind you. But as Laura said, I think there's motion picture lit agents that represent writers and directors. There's same as it goes for TV lit agents that represent showrunners and writers and directors of television. There's talent agents that only represent actors and actresses. A lot of people, whether it's a director or, most of them the bigger ones will have 3 agents on their team. And usually it's different levels of agents. So it's the junior agent, which is the one that does most of the work, which will calculate lists and kind of be the one that's probably interfacing via email with the clients the most, of sending them stuff. There's kind of the mid-level agent that deals with the studio executives. And then there's the big boss agent, usually have the big clients, the partner of so one of the partners will be for the big clients, and we'll get involved when a big deal is to get done. And so, most for example, me as a producer, there's 5 agents on my team. I every time we do a call, it's okay, I got to wait for 5 people and all get on the phone, and but they all do different things. One of them focuses on talent for packaging for us. One of them focuses on TV. One of them focuses on motion picture lit. One of them's a finance agent, and so it deals with more of the finance side of it. So it's nice to have all of those people, but I also think that agents sometimes, can cause more problems than they help. Sometimes too. So there's 2 sides of the coin.
Yeah, and to add to what Andy is saying about having a large team and knowing what everyone's role is, there's an actress who was just in a movie that premiered in Venice and Toronto, and she's unrepresented. She's a foreign actress, and I've been advising her on the meetings that she's been taking. And what I've been telling her is get really specific with these agents and managers about what type of relationship you will have with them. Because there are managers of like very large actresses that are making certain representations to her. And I'm saying to her, ask them, how often will I be speaking to you, and how often will I be speaking to a junior manager or, junior agent? And those kind of clarifications when you're getting signed, you have to have a healthy expectation because there's only 24 hours in a day. So a very large agent isn't going to be waiting on you hand and foot. But at the same time, if they're only there in the signing meeting and you never hear from them again, well, that's important because you had a certain expectation going in, that you were going to be getting the same type of access to information as someone else that is represented by the same agent. If you never hear from them again and they're just used as a signing tool, then that's definitely a material point. I think, agencies historically, and this is the last thing I'll say about agencies before I move on to the difference between agents and managers, is historically, they just had motion picture and television departments. They were called 10%eries because they take 10% of the deals that they negotiate for you. But I don't know what year it changed. I want to say maybe 90s, early 2000s. This is before they started getting into even sports. They started to diversify, agencies did, into what kind of services they would provide to the client. And I guess I shouldn't say services, I should say verticals. So motion picture and television deals were the core business. And, maybe there was an actress who wanted to start a perfume line or go on a speaker series or write a book and you get a publisher. They started to develop these, a book division, a lifestyle division, a speakers division. And so now these teams, especially if you're maybe an actress or a director who's multifaceted, does a lot of things, your team can end up being like 15 people. But that's really that comes from how diversified you are as talent. Like Andy has 5 people on his team because he does something really specific and he does it really well. And there are agents within the building that also have that specialty. So just know that there is that kind of optionality. If you go to a major agency, if you go to a smaller agency, they may not have as many divisions like that. But if you go to any of the big 3, CAA, WME, or UTA, there is that kind of optionality.
And before we move to managers, because I think it's important, I think, as we differentiate the two, because we'll talk about managers next. But agents, so the best way to describe agents is like they're really just there to help you make deals, in my opinion. They're not going to build your career if you're a writer or a director or an actor. So usually an agent will come into your life once your career is already either progressing forward in a really significant way or like on the bubble of about to like explode into that next level. At that point, an agent will come onto your team. So agent is not going to sign you if you have nothing for them to sell. And so even if you talk about things that you eventually are going to be able to sell, there's no reason for them to spend their time on it. And so I always tell people that an agent is only going to be as good for you as much stuff you give them to do for you. They're not going to bring, sometimes they will suggest things like, hey, there's this movie's looking for a director. Why don't you read this script? That's about as far as they go. They're not going to look at your career as like a long-term 10-year plan on how to build you from A to B. They're going to be there. They're very sort of transactional, and they very much love shiny, bright things in their face that they will jump on when they see them. But an agent has, let's call it a mid-level agent will probably have at least 50 clients on their list. And so you have to assume that like you're just one of a bunch. They've got a million things going on and they don't have enough time to like put real energy or effort. Like every time an agent will call me and go, hey, I spent the weekend and I read your script and I really enjoyed it. You think you're like, wow, like my first thought is like, no, you didn't. You probably read some coverage on it because you don't usually spend 2 hours to read a script unless it's like the hottest script around town that you have to know what it is. But B, if they have taken that time to do that, like that's a really significant thing, at least for me, to go, okay, you've carved off 2 hours of your time to do that. But agents are like, you're not some people think like, oh, I signed with an agent, my career is like off and running. And that's not what that means. If you don't give them a lot to do, there will be nothing for them to do for you, which means you will not progress. An agent, like I said, an agent will usually sign a director or an actress or a writer after they've done something significant already. So like if you are a director and you maybe scrounged together $600,000 and you made your first movie and it got into Sundance and everyone's talking about it. When everyone's talking about it, that's when an agent will approach you to sign you. They're not going to sort of like look at your short films from years prior and decide that eventually, maybe one day, if you ever make a feature, that they'll then, they'll build you up to that. They'll jump on your team once you've made your first feature. And then what they'll do is they'll use that to really sort of take your career to the next level. They'll do a screening within the agencies. They'll invite a bunch of producers and studio executives to come see your work. A lot of it is self-serving at times to show everyone like, look, we got that person that everyone loves, because it's a very competitive environment in the agency systems. But a lot of people think that, oh, I signed with an agency, off goes my career and I'm about to explode. And that just isn't normally what that means. Unfortunately, a lot of people are very disappointed with that. A manager, on the other hand, and I'll let you you have a question, Jess?
Well, yeah, just before we move on to manager, thinking about this from the investor's perspective. Somebody makes a ton of money in tech, they make a ton of money in real estate or something, and they're coming to town and they, they want to make movies. What are things that they should take seriously versus take with a grain of salt when they hear from somebody's agent?
It depends. So like, what you're saying, that they want to finance movies, which means they're approaching an agency to bring them opportunities to finance movies?
Sure. Or they're the rich guy in town who's trying to decide what he wants to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And maybe they kind of like financed a couple of things ad hoc here or there. And now they're thinking about getting more serious, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you can meet with so-and-so's agent. And it's like, okay, what should I, whether it's a top director or it's a top actor.
Whatever agent will tell you to do, if you're a rich guy that is trying to get into Hollywood, they're going to try to take your money. So like, that's going to always be their goal. How do we get money out of this person to eventually feed that into our other clients? Keep it internally in the agency. And so how do we pull money from him or her to shuffle it to him or her, which gives us 10% of that one that we shuffle it to, plus a fee from the money that we took. So it's like, the agent's going to want it to circulate within that agency as much as they possibly can. I mean, Laura did this for a living for many, many years. Not that way, but in a much better way.
Laura, let's get another perspective from a different point of view.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think we could do a whole podcast just on this topic alone. If you are a high net worth individual and you are thinking about getting into the film or TV industry, first of all, be careful who you tell about this interest, because the rule in Hollywood is that all the money on the table must be spent. Like, I don't know why it's that way. And I've had philosophical differences with people about this. I mean, my manifesto for my career is I want to build companies that will outlast me. And that is not everyone's belief. Now, you also have to realize about the ecosystem that a lot of these people are not necessarily living paycheck to paycheck, but it's a very speculative industry, and you don't know. You may have a lot of great projects on your slate as a director or producer, but you don't know when those projects are going to go. And a lot of people don't get paid until first day of principal photography. So you may have like the hottest screenplay in the industry, which actually gets measured. We can talk about that too in another episode. Which ones are the most popular screenplays like in the industry ranked by executives. But if Daniel Day-Lewis is attached to your project and he only works every 4 years, and everybody like, that's how you arrange your financing, the director is broke until then. The producer has to find other projects to do until then. So there's a lot of agendas to navigate. And the thing I always say is that the math is easy and the people are hard. And so you have to figure out exactly. You can't just judge a project on the merits of how good the screenplay is. There's a lot of other things that you have to navigate through.
What are a couple of them?
As an investor, there are, I guess, two paths that are pretty popular for high net worth individuals to take. I'm not saying either one is the right one. It's just that there are paths that have been, crossed a lot. So one is going to one of the major agencies into the packaging division, which is where I used to work, and you take a general meeting and you talk to the agents about what type of projects you're interested in. Normally, a lot of investors will go that path because they already have a couple of projects that they're linked to in some way, or they're interested in. And so the client of the agency wants to get them into the agency to get them to close the investor, et cetera, et cetera. So you really have to have your wits about you in those meetings, but take the meetings because you get really interesting information. Something that is not immediately apparent to investors, because why would it be? It's not published anywhere, is that investors get prioritized. In the late 2000s, early to mid 2010s, there weren't really enough independent investors to make a competitive market. And so just you having a relationship with a packaging division at a major agency was enough for you to get phone calls and to be reading screenplays every week and evaluating which ones you wanted to finance. By the mid 2010s, there were really so many investors that were in the ecosystem, and the streamers created a bubble in the independent marketplace that retainers started to become popular. So if you were an investor who paid a retainer to an agency, you would get first look before the rest of the investors who are known to the agencies ended up getting any sort of read or even knew about the project. Maybe somebody, slipped it to other people and you got it that way. But if you really want to have like a first look at projects, you end up becoming a retainer client of an agency. I have,
Which
yeah,
can we
go ahead.
can we just go into that a little bit? Because I find that insane, just personally. That
I do too.
I've had, investor friends of mine that come back to me going like, you should read this deal that this agency sent me. They want 20 grand a month. And I was like, whoa, back up. You lost me at the very beginning, which is they want 20 grand a month. And they go, yeah, that's how the deal works. We pay them a retainer and then we get access to stuff. I go, wait, these people are so desperate for financing for their movies. I promise you, if you have enough money and you have a lot of money and you're willing to spend it, you don't need to pay them to bring you opportunities that they will 100% bring you if you have money and are willing to spend it, because their clients desperately need to work. They want their movies financed. They now have a direct source of financing within that agency. They'll make their money from you by commissioning you or doing something else. I don't know, but I know so many people do it. And I was like, when I started to find out about it, and maybe it's being naive on like the side of the business that I've been on my whole career, but I was like, this sounds crazy that people are paying agencies a monthly retainer to bring them opportunities to feed their own clients when getting movies made. It seems like double dipping to me.
Andy, I'm gonna agree with you, but by way of a disagreement first. So
Yeah.
the reason why that ecosystem was put into play, because I was experiencing it live and in real time, is that as an agent, you don't know whose money is real and whose is not. I was meeting 2-3 new investors a week for years, and our roster was very long, and the movies would come together and fall apart 2 or 3 different times before they would actually go. And so a retainer, which is recoupable against transactional expenses, was a way to really discern, A, is this person's money real? And B, like, are they committed to this? Because we would meet people who were famously wealthy, but after 3 or 4 months, maybe they got distracted by something else, or maybe something happened in their personal life. And so any sort of traction that we made with that person, like, the retainer ended up getting them to really focus in a way that was very productive. And I think that was important because, we're managing like really big personalities, and we don't want to lose clients, talent clients, maybe a big actress or big director. And if the financing has fallen apart 3 times for a movie, it seems like we're not doing our job. as packaging agents. So I think that if the retainer hadn't been recoupable against transactional expenses, I would agree with you. But because it's recoupable against a fee that it's baked into the budget of the movie, then it ends up working out for people. Now, here's where I agree with you. I went from being an agent to being a retainer client of a major agency. And so I've experienced both sides of the transaction. And I think by the mid 2010s, I was in bidding wars every other week against Netflix, against Paramount, against, all these different studios. And I would throw elbows just like everybody else. Like there are some things I would overpay for, there are some things I wouldn't. But the prices of the projects were getting really, really insane. And a $17 million movie was now closing a deal for 30 or 32 million. And that pushes back the cash break even point for the investor, and you're never going to make any money. And who's
Yeah.
pocketing that? It's the talent that's also represented by the agency that is also taking a 10% of their agreement. And so I think that a much better way to go is, and this is not an advertisement for Andy, I truly, truly believe this. Go to IMDb, look at your favorite movies, look at who produced them, figure out if they're actually like a PGA producer. Like, did they actually produce the movie? And give them a call. Because I think that producers who consistently find traction for their projects, they have, they have the codes. They have they understand how the industry works, and you can wield them as a tool, as a partner. I shouldn't say a tool. You're not a tool, Andy.
I don't know, Andy, have you been
To
called a
make your
tool
projects
before?
work.
I have not. That's a first for me.
And look, look, the first way is agency. Second way, the middle way, probably the best way, is, producers. The third way is there are investors who they just, through passion and vigor and all of that, they just do it on their own. They just finance a movie on their own, and either they chalk it up as a mistake or they get really lucky. And if they get really lucky and the movie is at Sundance or Toronto, one of like the five major film festivals are Sundance, South by Southwest, Cannes, Venice to some extent, Toronto, and some people love Telluride, but Telluride really segues right into Toronto. And the reason why these markets are important, and we call them they're film festivals, but they're also markets, because there are thousands of film festivals throughout the world, and you might be really excited that you got into some, indie film festival in Idaho or Florida. But the markets where the buyers actually show up and buy the movie to distribute it, which is how an investor gets reimbursed, is at the five that I mentioned. And so maybe they get lucky and they get a movie that gets into those festivals, and the studios are there, the streamers are there, the agents and managers are there. They're all in a room watching these films at the same time. And either a bidding war incites or it doesn't, and it sells a few months later. And that's when you start to see money back. And that's what you want as an investor. But at that point, then you start getting sucked into the industry. And if you don't have somebody who is a captain of the ship who knows how to, help you navigate those waters,
Yeah.
anything could happen.
You need somebody, if you're an investor with a lot of money and you're only relying on an agency and an agent to make your decisions for you, I think you're in trouble. I think you do need somebody that's a neutral third party, most likely a producer, to bounce things off of. Oh, they're pitching me this person. They say that they want me to put 8 million into their movie. And, one phone call to a producer will probably tell you, like, hey, that director is notoriously really difficult. They go over budget all the time. No one will touch their movies from financing perspective with a 10-foot pole, and they're bringing it to you. Is this something you want to invest your money into? And so, like, you need to get opinions. You need to ask outside the agency, even if you're represented by the agency, because there is always an agenda. They always have an agenda. But I think that just going back just really quickly to the paying a retainer, think like we know as professionals, if you were coming into town with like $100+ million that you want to put into movies, I would hope that people will be able to figure out like who you are and that you're legit. If you've made that kind of money, there's probably information out there that exists on you, knowing that like to tell people like this is a real person that's been a professional, has been very successful, has made a lot of money. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like I think that like the idea that you need to prove yourself that you actually have money to an agency by paying them every month, outside of them being able to tell this person has been very successful in some other field and now they're coming into our field. I don't know. I just have such a hard time with it, but I understand how
I like the tug of war here because I can actually see both your sides of it. Let's do this though. I'm some big investor. You sold my company to Google for millions of dollars, and this is what I want to do. What should I expect out of a meeting with an agent versus a manager, and what does a manager do versus an agent?
Someone once described the difference between an agent and manager as for every fourth or fifth call you make to your manager, you make one to your agent. Like
It's a good way to do it. And by the way,
it might be
you as
even
someone that
5
just
or
did-
10, actually.
Yeah, you as someone that just did that, Jess, I don't think needs a manager. I've never seen. Usually don't see high net worth individuals that are looking to invest in movies that have a manager. Usually they'll have like a producer that's kind of their advisor or that's helping them make their decisions. But a manager, not a manager, is mostly going to be for writers, directors, actors.
So I guess my question is this. I'm some investor. I've come to town. Maybe I have an agency or a producer friend who made an introduction to me, and I'm having a lunch with some director's manager instead of their agent. What should I expect differently in that meeting?
I think a director's manager is going to know them as a person a lot better than the agent will. They will spend a lot more time with them. They will know intimately what kind of movies they're really looking for, like what they want as their next step in their career and the evolution of their careers. A manager, in my opinion, is someone that is so important because they look at the longevity. They look at longevity for your career. They're not transactional. They know that the decision that they're advising you on now will have repercussions 7 years from now. Because, as we like to say, like you're only as good as your last movie or your movie before that. And so you have to be a manager is sort of there to kind of like keep the agent in making good choices. The agent's job is to make you money and to do your deal for the most part. And a manager's job is to make sure that you're not just making money, but you're progressing your career forward and in a positive way at the same time. And an agent will tell you that's also their job as well, but they don't have the time to do that. A manager does have the time. A manager, for every agent that has 50 clients, a manager will have 12 maybe, and so the numbers are much smaller. A manager will know the client much better than the agent will because they just have more time to spend with them. They've got more invested in them. They will have usually found them sometimes before they've even had a career. A manager will jump on sometimes just because you're promising. You look like you may have a career as some. So they'll come on earlier and they're willing to do more work for sure. They will do a lot more work for their 10%.
Laura, how do you see it the same or different?
I see it the same. And I think that if you're meeting with a manager, you might get more information, more color, a more personal relationship, but they have a little bit more time and they will do digging on you. It is if you have a piece of bad publicity or something, manager's probably going to find it because it's their job to protect their client. And so if you've got any skeletons in your closet, they're gonna check and see if you are in good standing with any of the unions. They are going to, look at anything online. I used to work hand in hand with a manager where I would try to figure out if before we were charging the retainer, I had to figure out ways to see if investors were actually financing movies. And a manager friend of mine and I came up with a strategy to talk to a bonding company on a regular basis. And I would take the president of the bonding company out to lunch once a month. And if there were certain financiers who were pulling out of movies during a bank closing, then I would know about it and I wouldn't take calls from that person anymore because it was really a waste of my time. And I had a manager friend who had enough time to do that as well, and she did it on behalf of her clients. So, like, you just need to know that, like, if you're trying to develop a relationship with a manager of, say, a director that you're a really big fan of, they're going to be spending time with you, and they want to know if you're worth their time as well.
And the managers also, like, for me anyways, I would, if I look someone up and I want to try to get a project to a director or a writer or an actor, I will usually call their manager first before their agent. And that's only because I know that that person that I'm speaking to will be more focused on what our conversation is about. They have less going on in the world. There's more action usually that comes from talking to a manager than an agent. And that's not the agent's fault. They just have so much going on that when, as soon as they hang up the phone from you, they're on the phone with someone else about something completely different. And there's just so much happening in an agent's world, but a manager is much more focused. And so, usually I like to say too, like, you're going to get the real from the manager. You're going to get like the cosmetic version from the agent, and you're going to get like the realities of the situation from the manager usually, because they're the ones that are going to know emotionally what those clients are going through and why they made certain decisions and what's going on and what's important to them, what's not important to them. It's way that kind of minutia is sort of below what an agent usually has to deal with.
I have something, I like, a burning desire to say something, which is, if I experienced a windfall myself and I had like $200 million that I could just play with, I probably wouldn't go to the film industry first. But if I did, I would not announce that I was starting an investment company.
Agreed.
I would quietly go about my work, and what I would do is I would reverse engineer from what movies and TV shows have inspired me, and I would reverse engineer my relationships starting from there. I mean, if I had no relationships in the industry whatsoever, this is what I would do. I would hire an executive or two, because sometimes you need a layer. Actually, I would highly recommend a layer of people in between you and the industry. You need an assist. You need an office line with an assistant who will screen your calls, tell you who called. Because once the inertia starts to happen, people are starting to find out that you're interested in spending money or you started spending money. That layer is really going to keep you sane. I would say get an assistant and get an executive. Don't hire them right away, but like, the executive should be reading through screenplays, and they should be a sounding board with you to figure out what type of entertainment company are you building. Because and I learned this. There was a financier client that I used to represent, and she was very press averse. She still is today. She does not give interviews. And up until that point, I had seen investors make these splashy announcements like, we have $500 million to spend. Well, then they just started getting calls from everywhere. Then they had to hire multiple executives to deal with the onslaught of all the different material they're getting. And it's almost like the industry decided what that person might be interested in, and they just started giving it to them. I experienced it when I opened AG Capital, because people knew that the family office that I represented was from Mexico. And I got every cartel screenplay that existed. I got every like border crossing script that existed. I mean, people just decided that those are the kind of projects that we wanted. And I really had to over and over again talk to people about what our mandate was as a company. So you can avoid all of that if you don't announce, build a layer for yourself. And once you've built that layer, a very small layer of an executive and an assistant, and maybe a couple of producers like Andy or myself that you've reached out to and said, hey, like, I need help navigating this and I'm not sure how I want to do this yet. Once you've done that, then start reaching out to representatives saying, I really love Paul Thomas Anderson, and I don't necessarily have an agenda. I would just like to have a conversation with you about what projects he has next, what is he passionate about, what makes him tick as a human being, and just get to know those people on that kind of level. And I would also say that it is not beneath any very big director or very big actor or very big writer to take a meeting with you. Some investors who have come to the industry, they get so excited and they're such a fan that like they don't sit down with these people like and look them in the eye. And that's a huge difference maker moving forward with your relationship with creatives. And so that should definitely be part of the process as well. So if I knew nobody in the industry, that's how I would do it. And what will happen is if you just focus on the work, you do it quietly for a few months. Let's say you reach out to a manager. Everyone else within the management company or the agency will know within 3 months. Then people in the industry will know about you 3 months later. Then like the press will know about you 3 months later. And the great thing about that is that, like my client who I used to represent, you can form the company the way that you want to see it rather than having to field all of these random projects that are just busy making from the industry. And the reason why those projects are available is because they're probably not very good anyway. So you want to do it in the reverse and just start quietly and build from there, and people will eventually know you, and hopefully they know you for your actual taste.
Yeah, it's funny as we're talking, thinking about a conversation I had with Andy in the spring about somebody had offered to let me be a part of a project that they've been an executive producer on a movie that I really liked that did very well, and they have this new one coming up, and they had a very recognizable name, and it took Andy about like 2 minutes to be like, hold on, who is this? Let me look this up. And he's like, oh no, you don't want to do that. Here, I'm sending you some press articles. Let me tell you about that person's boss and why you don't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole. And P.S., that actor cannot carry a movie. That is not like, yes, everybody knows them. Everybody knows them, but that is not bankable talent that you can just go, oh yeah, we can easily put 18 million to that. We're going to be fine. And they're a little too old now. It was like 6 minutes later. You know what I mean? And it was like bang, bang, bang. But that's it's just like an endorsement of what you guys are saying.
Yeah, I think the money spent on, consultation
Expertise.
expertise is time that you're saving and money that you're saving in the long run. So don't balk at that. It's so important.
It really is. And I think even just consultants, hiring someone as a consultant to say, hey, like I'm coming to the business, I want to finance movies. Can you just sort of like be my guy? I mean, remember like Laura, when we did the deals together on Mojave and Hollow Point, there was a company called Micah Entertainment that was financing movies. And they had found us because they had hired, not to say like, it's the only reason they found us, but they hired my grandfather to be their consultant on like, how does film finance work? And just someone that we can call and pick up the phone that we know doesn't have their hand out to try to take as much out of our pockets as they can. Yes, we're paying this person, but like they care about what we're going to do and what we feel like our agenda is. Because the problem is when you go to an agency with a lot of money, the agenda for the agency is always going to be the agency, no matter what. Even though they will make you think that it's you and that they're giving you good opportunities. Every single decision that they make and everything that they give you, they think about how it benefits them first and then how it could benefit you. And if it doesn't benefit them, they won't bring it to you because it won't benefit. So there's all of those things you have to keep in mind when you have significant capital you're coming into this business. Laura is totally right. Do not announce it, because when you announce it, everyone in town is going to circle like vultures. And when they know you have 200 million to spend, your deals get more expensive too. So you have to everything is so, you have to be very, very careful. And every step you take should be very strategic. And consultants and people that have experience in the business can absolutely help you make those strategic things without you having to make big salary commitments to those people or hire staff or do those things that may be a little bit difficult for you at that time. But yeah, I don't know how we got on this, but yeah, agents and managers.
The button. I think the button on the story I was telling about my client that I used to represent who stayed really quiet. She has won multiple Academy Awards for her movies, you know? So she was press averse, so I don't think she was doing it as an intentional strategy, but I think that just get to the work and be very specific about who you want to be in business with. Don't be flashy, and good things will come to you.
That's what Megan Ellison did when she first started. I mean, you think about what she did when she first started. She did it exactly. She was, she was like, I want to be in business with these directors. And she went off and told them, like, listen, I'll finance your movies and you don't have to deal with the studio. And by the way, there's no better time than now for some filmmakers that would love those opportunities to say, hey, I can go make my movie outside the studio system and then sell it to them. But that's how she got Catherine Bigelow on Zero Dark 30 and Jared Russell on American Hustle and Spike Jones on Her. These are filmmakers that she just obviously went after because she had the money to finance their stuff. And they were like, this sounds like a great way to make our movie.
Well,
Lots of
Andy
other stuff
figured out,
happened after that.
yeah,
But that was the early side of her, her dish.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So,
How do you think about that, Laura?
I'm just thinking that I'm so impressed that Andy figured out who my client was.
And I remember when and that's what she is, she doesn't, I don't blame her. She wants to stay away from the limelight. I understood why, whose daughter she was and all the questions that would be asked in the press. And there was nothing positive was going to come from that for doing that press at the beginning.
Yeah, I think so too. Just, be Beyonce. Don't say anything. Just make the stuff. People will figure it out later and everyone will be totally wowed by everything you do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, those are the differences between agents and managers. There's also lawyers. And so, agents, last time I checked, charge 10%, managers 10 to 15%, lawyers, what is it, Andy? 5, 10?
5. If your lawyer's working for you on commission, it's 5%. So they take 5% of anything that you make on the deals that they do for you.
Right. So choose wisely because that's all before taxes.
Well, do agents make a lot more money than managers because they have more clients and they're all making 10%? Or how does that work?
No, because the agents, they don't get to keep that 10%. That 10% goes to the agency. They get bonuses at the end of the year that are based off of their commission they make throughout the year. A manager, if they're an independent manager and they're just their own manager and they have clients, that 10% does go to them. But the managers that work for like the bigger companies like Anonymous Content and 360 and those ones, again, that 10% doesn't all go to them either. It's structured similarly. In a sense, they get a portion of it. Some of it gets recouped out of their salaries, and then they get a percentage of that. And so there's different ways to do it. The lawyers, same way. Lawyers, that 5% will go to the law firm usually at the end of the year. If you're at a big firm. So that's kind of how it works. I mean, Laura, you may have heard some minutiae to that too.
Just some extra details, which is that agents are licensed by the state, so they're not allowed to have any sort of ownership in the things that in the projects that they build. So they can only charge the percentage, which goes to the parent company. It doesn't go to them, like Andy said. With managers, they charge their manager percentage, but they also sometimes step in as producers or executive producers on the projects that their clients are making, and there's a fee attached to that. So they do a version of double dipping. Now, agencies do a version of double dipping as well, which is they take 10% of their clients' fees, but they also charge what are called packaging fees. So as an investor, if I really think that the path we described is a really good one. Some investors are very impatient and all they want to do is shop around for fully packaged projects. And so they call agencies and they're like, what fully packaged projects do you have? So what does a fully packaged project mean? It means it has a director attached. It has, actors and actresses. It has a start date, and you end up paying a premium for that. The project itself is probably going to be more expensive than it should be because there's such a market for fully packaged projects. But in addition to the 10% the agency is charging to the creatives, they're also baking in a fee as a line item in the budget on first day of principal photography. And that fee, which is anywhere from probably $50,000 to $400,000 as a line item in the budget, is comparable to what a manager might take as like a producer or executive producer fee. So it all kind of balances. Not saying it's right. I'm just like, be aware of these fees, and don't be surprised by them as you encounter them throughout the process.
I have a strong opinion on the manager producer because you see that
Oh,
a
let's
lot.
hear it.
Surprise!
I have no opinion.
I'm shocked. I'm
You
shocked
see it a
Andy didn't
lot
think they
now.
should give me a
Yeah.
producer just because they
It
want to be.
ties into my ranting that the producer title has been bastardized to not mean much these days. But it comes from a lot of that comes from this scenario that we're just discussing. You know, managers to sometimes to sign clients or to benefit their clients, because it does benefit their clients to take a producing credit on the movie that they sold just for doing their job as a manager. They didn't do any producing, they just did their job as a manager, but they're now taking a producing credit. And what the way that works is that the client, when they sell the script to a studio, they pay that commission, that 10% to the manager. But the manager then gets to negotiate his own producing deal with the studio. Let me just be really clear that the studios will give them the middle finger and say, we're not paying you a producing fee for most of them. The real producer will have to give you a percentage of their fee because we're only going to put an X amount into the producing pot. We're not carving off your own producing deal for Mr. Manager. Work it out with the producer. Tell them what you want of their fee. Then when that movie gets made and the producer, the real producer, actually gets paid for making the movie, the manager will then refund the commission to the client. So therefore, it does save the client having to pay that 10%. They're not paying 10% to their manager anymore. Well, they paid it, but now they're getting it back because now the manager's making a producing fee. But sometimes when I try to talk some sense into some of these clients, because they think it's great that they're saving the 10%, and then I tell them, by the way, the fee that your manager is asking for is $300,000. And just so you're aware, that's one day of shooting, maybe 2 days of shooting. So just know that our 30-day schedule on the movie just turned into a 28-day schedule. So you could save having to pay the commission to your client, to your manager. And so that manager can pocket that money for not stepping foot on set and not really producing the movie. And so as a real producer, it drives me crazy. You know, sometimes a manager will do some producing work early on. It does happen for sure. And some of my very good friends that are managers do produce movies sometimes. In those scenarios, the way that I would say that they do deserve those producing credits are if they brought an idea to their client. So like, let's say they sourced an article and brought it to their client, or they pitched an idea to their writing client that then the writing client developed into a spec and they developed it all along with them and was a part of it. Okay. There's an argument to be made for some form of a producing credit. In my opinion, that's an executive producing credit and some fee. But usually if it's a movie that it's a big movie and the writer makes a lot of money, that fee that they're going to get should not be anywhere in terms of 10% of what the writer makes, right? There's a discrepancy in my opinion about what that fee usually should be. So the best way to describe it, this manager producer situation is a very big reason as to why the PGA mark exists. It was a part of what spurred the mark to be created. Was this was happening a lot and real producers were getting very upset. It was pulling money off the screen. It was people sharing credits with real producers that spent 3 years of your life on a movie for someone that maybe have not done any producing work at all, but got the producing credit. So, as Laura said, agents cannot do that. Agents cannot take producing credits. Agents they're not legally allowed to take any kind of ownership roles in any kind of the things that they work on.
Can I say something about lawyers? Because we haven't touched on them too much, and there's a couple of key things I want to mention. So one is I made a mistake a few years ago as I was transitioning from being an agent to running a family office that was financing projects. And my mistake is that I was like a career negotiator who was supposed to be, I was kind of in neutral territory as an agent, in that I had to close the deal. The movie gets made, then I evaluate it as a finished product so that I can go sell it to studios to get the investors reimbursed. When I switched over, one of my first projects that I was negotiating on, it was a competitive situation. I got in there and we ended up being in a very long negotiation because I had a lawyer who was good but wasn't a bulldog, and a bulldog was really required in this situation. So I became that person. I became the person that was having the tough conversations with the producers of this project because my lawyer wasn't stepping in to do that. My mistake is that when I closed the deal, which, both parties were happy with and a little unhappy with, and that's always a good sign because, everybody gave a little something. But I then had to work on this project for like 2 years with these people. And as an investor, maybe you had a lot of, success in real estate, or you were a career negotiator. You have these skills that you want to implement into the process because you know that you can. Just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should, especially when it comes to the negotiations. Um, there's a lot of questions that you want to ask a lawyer. If you're interested, I'm happy to talk about that offline, because there are lawyers who I think are closers and others in the industry who they just redline things to death and nothing ever gets anywhere. But I think that you want to consider the personality of the lawyer, figure out what creatives are on the other side, who they're represented by. And you really need the lawyers or the representatives to step in on your behalf to fight certain battles, because at the end, all those people leave the negotiation because it's done and you're left with working with these people. And if there's too much bad blood between you and them because you were the voice that was difficult, you'll get colored that way for maybe the remainder of the relationship. It's hard to do a reset at that point, in my opinion. Andy, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's true. It is true. I would say that, if you're lucky enough to find a lawyer that will work on a 5% situation, those people will usually be more bulldog, in my opinion, because they want to get it done quicker. They're not getting paid hourly. So when it's requiring multiple conference calls and multiple drafts and multiple red lines, they're losing money because they're only making 5% of this deal. So they're not charging you hourly, which means that if you find someone that will agree to work on 5% for you, that's usually someone that knows how to get a deal done, because they're not going to waste their time futzing around if they're only getting 5%, knowing that they may work for a deal in 7 months it may take to get a deal done. If they're only getting 5%, it took them that long to get a deal done, they lost money on you in terms of what they're actually going to end up making and what you cost them for their time. So those lawyers that do those 5% deals, I think they're the best ones, because they're not, and not many of them will do them, especially if you're like a new entity coming into town. They'll charge you a retainer. But I don't know. I think lawyers, they're so important in this business, especially as a producer for me, not being someone that reads every single word of, a 200-page contract that sometimes I signed, and to know that there's people that are doing that know how this language works. I do think that lawyers sometimes can complicate situations when you may not need a lawyer, and you bring one in, it usually gets much more complicated. So to really know when you need one and when you don't is really important. There are situations where you just don't need one, and bringing one in will just make it worse. It'll take it longer to get through. And that's just because they have to do their jobs. And sometimes doing their jobs, creates more bumps in the road for you and what you're trying to get done. But when as we're starting to say these numbers, 5%, 10%, 10%, you're probably starting to realize that these numbers are adding up. If you're an agent, if you're a writer, a director, or an actor, and you have an agent, a manager, and a lawyer, that's 25% of your money. And then if you have a publicist, that's probably a $10,000 a month retainer that you're paying that publicist to do that. So, you're talking about 25% of your money before taxes. Luckily, your commissions are tax deductible. I think you think you can write those off, but that money adds up. That 25% adds up, and then so when you see these massive numbers of these big deals that are getting done, you look and see that these people have, a team of an agent, a manager, and a lawyer. Know that 25% of that money is not going in their pocket right off the bat, and then they're getting hit with taxes after that. So it gets very expensive if you have all those things. And so if you're going to have all those things, I hope you're putting them to use, and you're getting your money's worth, because it's expensive.
This is so great. I'm so happy we're doing this. I'm learning so much. Maybe what we should do, though, I don't know how you guys feel about. I think that we should end every one of these mini series with each of us picking a movie that we really love, and telling people what's a movie that you love. Andy, you want to go first?
I think we should do somewhat newer movies. I don't want to pull back into like 20 years ago. Maybe like something that we've seen recently because it's sort of like a little bit more topical. At least
Or
that's what I'll do.
I'm going to do a
Yeah.
caveat: either more topical, or you know, or less well known if it's older. How about that?
More topical or less one then. That works.
Like,
That works.
I'm gonna go. I'll go first then. I'll go.
Yeah, you go first.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt's book. Joseph Gordon-Levitt. His show Brick. Did you see that movie?
It's a movie.
Oh,
Yeah, I love that.
yeah.
I watched it in film school. I remember it really well. It was actually Ryan Johnson's first movie, and he has now become a
Oh, really?
monster of a filmmaker. Yeah, but that was one of his first films. It's a great, great movie.
And just quickly, so it's kind of like film noir, but in a high school in San Clemente, California. And there's all this crazy slang, and you have no idea what it means, except that you know what it means. And just a well done mystery. And anyways, I'm a fan. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Andy,
like
you're
an
up.
old school. It's like an old school film noir movie set present day in high school. I mean, it was made about 20 years ago, probably, but was so cool when it came out. I remember. I think I wrote a paper on it in film school. Actually, I remember it really well.
Okay. I would say this is definitely, I think, lesser known, and maybe it's because I went to a baseball game yesterday, but Battered Bastards of Baseball is such a good documentary. It is directed by the Way brothers. And the Way brothers are really known for taking found footage and piecing together a documentary on it. So they did Wild Wild Country, which was about the cult that formed in Oregon. So good, and they're such nice guys. But Battered Bastards of Baseball was about a baseball team that was developed, I think, in Oregon as well. And they, it was the baseball team was founded by a guy from Hollywood, and so he ended up casting the baseball team with like an open casting call, and men came from all over the world to try out for like this AAA team because this was their only chance that they were ever going to get to possibly get into the major leagues. And what happens after that is I still get chills, and I haven't seen this movie in probably 2 or 3 years. I actually tried to make that movie into a scripted feature, but couldn't get the rights holders to agree on some things, and so it never happened. But yeah, great found footage documentary.
And they're super talented. Those guys also do that series Untold that's on Netflix that everyone loves. That they do a really good job with as well. Those are very, very talented directors and producers. I would say something that I've seen recently that I really liked. I went to a screening at WME the other night for a movie called Kill, which is an Indian movie made in India. And it's like their version of John Wick, pretty much. It's really different. It's super violent, which was very surprising to me because usually violence like that doesn't come out of that region in terms of the films they make. It is, I think, when it comes out, from me talking to the filmmaker and the agents, it's sort of like the Indian film market being cracked open a little bit in terms of expanding outside of the Bollywood stuff that they do and the musical stuff they do. It's them sort of showing like, hey, we can actually make like Hollywood action movies as well. It's really well done. It premiered in the Midnight Madness section in Toronto a few weeks ago, and we'll probably start making some waves. Like I said, it's super violent. So if you're not into that stuff, you would hate it, but it's really imaginative. It all takes place on a train. It's like I said, it's like their version of John Wick, but like maybe even more violent in terms of how far they go with it. But it's really interesting and different. And I'm excited about it because I do feel like it will hopefully create a new thing coming out of India in terms of the kind of films that those filmmakers are focusing on, because there's so much talent in that region. They just have been kind of handcuffed for many years in terms of what they can and can't do.
Well, this is so fun, you guys. Anything either of you are working on you want to give a shout out to?
I mean, I'm just excited that I can finally go sell my movies. I've been sitting on them for 5 months and treading water, and they've been burning holes in my pocket. So we've got some really cool packages that we're going to take out to investors and financiers here in the next 2 or 3 weeks, whenever the WGA says we can and whenever SAG gets settled. But just very excited to get back to work.
I just try to talk about things once they're finished. Otherwise, I'm giving myself unnecessary dopamine hits in a very long process. So
That's great.
this is super fun though. I love doing this series, and yeah, let's reconvene once these WGA new contract terms get published.
Okay. Thanks everybody for listening.